Hello and welcome everyone to the Intrepid Museum's live virtual programming. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Lunar Landers program. So excited that you're here joining us. My name is Alicia and I'm an educator at the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum in New York City, and I'll be your host today. And just as a quick reminder that the museum's live streams are free, but if you'd like to join us in delivering this fun new content, we invite you to click on the link that you can find either in the comments or in the description. So everyone, feel free to use the chat today to say hello. Let us know where you're tuning in from. Let us know if you've ever been to the Intrepid Museum before, or if maybe you plan on visiting us sometime soon. We are open now, Thursdays through Sundays, 10 to 5. And also, if you've got any questions today, you can feel free to pop them in the chat as well. So today, everyone, we are going to be talking a little bit about spacecraft landers. So specifically things that have landed both here on Earth as well as on the moon and also some other planets too. But before we get to those, I want to recap a bit about the Intrepid itself and our special connection to space. So why are we even talking about space in the first place, right? Well, if you aren't already familiar, this is the Intrepid Museum. So we are located in a historic World War II aircraft carrier, the USS Intrepid, and it was constructed way back in 1943, and it's now a museum docked just a few blocks from Times Square in Manhattan, right on the Hudson River. So maybe you visited before, or maybe you're looking forward to visiting us again in the future. But either way, if you are in the neighborhood, it is kind of hard to miss. So we like to say that the Intrepid is so big that if you were to stand it up on its end, it would be taller than a New York City skyscraper. And it's also so long that you could play 3 games of football on it at the exact same time. So it's really, really big. Now, the Intrepid served in 3 wars: World War II, the Cold War, and the Vietnam War. And then a few years later, in 1982, we became the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum. But sometimes visitors get a little bit confused and they wonder, okay, I know you're a sea museum, an air museum, but the space museum part, what is that all about? Well, let's rewind for a second. We are, of course, a sea museum. As you can see in this picture, we are a naval ship. We sailed in the water. In fact, also, you can see here one of the 4 propellers that were on the Intrepid that pushed it through the water and is also now inside on display at the Intrepid too. So yeah, we've obviously got a lot of ties to the sea. But as you know, there are a few types of propellers. So here is another one on the front of this plane here, the Avenger from World War II. This is the oldest plane in our collection. It was a torpedo bomber, so you can actually see the torpedo underneath it. And this is just one of the many reasons why we are an air museum as well. So the Intrepid carried a number of airplanes in its time in service. In fact, it could fit up to 100 planes on the ship at a time. And it also had the ability to launch and land those planes, just like you might do at an airport. So it's basically a floating airport. Now, later on in the Cold War, we also had a bunch of planes like this one. This is the Fury. This is a jet plane, and it moved, of course, a lot faster than the propeller planes. Didn't use propellers, used that jet engine in the front there. And we also even had helicopters, too, which were used to rescue people from the ocean. So we have a few of those on display, too. So, all right, clearly, yes, we are an air museum because we are an aircraft carrier. We have a bunch of airplanes. We have a bunch of helicopters. We're still not really sure about space. Well, take a look at this. Now, if you are walking around on the hangar deck of the Intrepid, so that's kind of the garage area, we like to say, inside the ship, you are going to see this thing. And it's kind of going to stick out from the rest of the things that we have on display. It's a little bit, one of these things is not like the others. Does anyone know what this thing is? Tell me in the chat if you do. So we are looking here at this large black kind of light bulb shaped thing that says United States on it. It's got a flag, right? Some people say it even kind of looks like an ice cream cone that's tilted on its side, or maybe even a megaphone. Yeah, so it's actually a very, very special vehicle, though. So this is something called a space capsule, and it's the thing that took astronauts up into space. Now, capsules, of course, ride on the top of a rocket. The rocket is that thing that goes up into space. There's lots of fire that propels it coming out the bottom, right? But then once they're into space, they separate, all right? So they separate. They are able to continue floating around in outer space. So these capsules were part of something that was very important to our early NASA program called the Mercury Project. This was our earliest stages of going into space, which it really was just to see if people could even survive while they were in outer space. Now, this here that you are looking at is a replica of one of those early capsules, specifically called the Mercury Aurora 7. Now, in 1962, the astronaut who went up into space in the Aurora 7 was named Scott Carpenter. And here he is next to the Mercury Atlas rocket that took him into space. You can actually see the capsule right there on the tip of the rocket, that little black thing. And Scott Carpenter was actually only up in outer space for about 5 hours. He did 3 orbits around the Earth before then safely coming back down to Earth. But this is really important. Now, you have to remember, if you've got this big spacecraft hurtling back down through the atmosphere, you better pick a pretty good landing spot. You don't want to land on someone's house, right? You don't want to land, somewhere where it might just, crash into a mountain or something. You have to think about how it can land safely. That's going to be one of the things we're talking a lot about today. So they decided that the best place for these capsules to land would be the ocean. The Earth is, of course, 70% water anyway, so it's an easy target to aim for and a lot safer. They figured it'd be a nice, softer landing space than on land. So here's Scott Carpenter landing in the Atlantic Ocean. And you'll also notice that there are those big parachutes that came out on top there too. So that was there, of course, to help to increase the drag to slow down the capsule as it came down so that it could even get to a safer speed, slower, so that the astronaut wouldn't get hurt. So this right here, when it is crashing down into the ocean, it's something that we call splashdown. That's the term for it. But if something this big is going to land in the ocean, NASA still, of course, needs to pick him up, and the actual capsule too. You can't just, leave it stranded out there floating in the middle of the ocean forever. So they sent a helicopter to rescue him. But actually, when they got to the place he was supposed to be, they couldn't find him. And that's because while he was wrapping up his mission, Scott Carpenter had gotten just a little distracted by one of the experiments that he was working on, and he fired his re-entry thrusters 2 seconds too late. And as a result, he ended up splashing down into the water, but about 200 miles off course. Well, fortunately, they were able to track him down. He was just fine. There you can see him in that little red circle being lifted up on a helicopter. So they picked him up and they flew him to the closest airport that happened to be in the water, which also happened to be the Intrepid. And so here he is on board the ship. Here's some photos from our collection. There he is, surrounded by officers and onlookers on board the Intrepid after being picked up from his capsule in 1962. So a very, very momentous occasion. And there he is on the decks too. He had a chance to change out of his shiny silver spacesuit. He's a little more comfortable now. So really, really cool pictures from our archives that he was actually right on board with us too. So ladies and gentlemen, this is the reason why we are a space museum. The Intrepid played a very important role in retrieving astronauts and their capsules after they returned from outer space. But I will say the Mercury capsule wasn't the only one that we picked up. We also picked up the Gemini capsules too, or one of them anyway. So this next series of missions were called the Gemini Missions. And this was named after the Gemini constellation. If you are familiar, or maybe that's your zodiac sign, you might know that that is the constellation of the twins. And it was an appropriate name because it was the first time that NASA sent up 2 astronauts up into space together inside of the capsule. So on board Gemini 3 that you can see here in this picture, we've got John Young and Gus Grissom. So these 2 astronauts also went up into outer space. They orbited the Earth 3 times. And then, same thing, they splashed down into the Atlantic Ocean. So here is a picture of the Intrepid retrieving the Gemini capsule from the ocean in 1965. And in these pictures, you can see this yellow thing around it. You see that little kind of yellow tube around it? That's a flotation collar. And it was used to help the capsule to float in the water while it was waiting to get picked up. So funny story, they actually added this a little bit later in the missions because Gus Grissom, one of the astronauts on this Gemini 3 mission actually, one of his earliest missions going into space was part of the Mercury program. So he was in the Mercury capsule called the Liberty Bell 7. And when he landed in the ocean, something bad happened. The door of his capsule accidentally fell off believe it or not. And his capsule started to fill up with water and it sunk. Now, he was okay. He was fine. He was rescued in time, but his capsule did not fare so well. So it sunk to the bottom of the ocean, and it took them over 20 years actually to find it and to retrieve it. So adding a floaty like this was actually very important to make sure that it was, kept safe after all, after landing, and especially that the astronaut was kept safe too. But everything is fine now, and Gus Grissom was fine after that too. So these earlier NASA missions had a lot of experiments going on, a lot of tests to see how humans would fare in outer space and how to get the equipment just right, of course, before we were going to head all the way off to our main goal, which was the moon. But before we head on to that era of space flight, I just want to pause really fast and see if we have any questions so far. So does anyone have any questions for me? Why did they only send up 2 astronauts during the Gemini missions? Right. So, as I mentioned, the Mercury missions only, well, actually, you might have only noticed it's pretty small. It only sent up one person at a time. So, they wanted to take baby steps, really. If you could think of it like the Mercury missions were just those baby steps. You're a newborn, you're just learning how to breathe in space. You're just, you're eating literally applesauce. You're eating like baby food up there. Very, very simple motor skills up there, just figuring out how to just move around and survive up there. The Gemini missions are more kind of the toddler stage, right? A little bit more where you have the opportunity now to learn how to walk. This was the first time that we took our first extravehicular activity, right? So spacewalks. First time we did that. First time we also docked with another ship. So we like to say that's like making friends in space. So we're, able to do things like eat harder foods now as well. So to answer your question, why did they only send up 2? Again, it's just baby steps. We didn't want to send up a whole bunch at one time just in case something went wrong. We were learning how to make things bigger and, conserve energy, conserve fuel, conserve oxygen, and think about things like food up there. So eventually, once we got to space shuttle era, we're sending 7, 8 people at a time. But we just wanted to do it sequentially and take our time getting into space to make sure everyone was okay. All right, one more question maybe? Did all capsules land in the Atlantic Ocean? No, they did not. So these 2 that we talked about today did land in the Atlantic Ocean. At the time, they were being launched from Florida. So landing in the Atlantic down, near the Bahamas in that area was really easy for them to be able to retrieve the capsule, take it back to their headquarters, get any data that they needed out of it, learn about what they needed to learn from those missions. But later missions landed in the Pacific. Actually, the Apollo missions landed in the Pacific, or the moon landing one, Apollo 11. But also, as actually I'll talk about in just a little bit, they also landed on land too, in the desert, which sounds a little unusual and doesn't sound very safe, but I'll explain why and how they were able to do it in just a minute. So that is a great segue. Now, before we talk about the Apollo missions, right, going to the moon, which of course came next after Gemini, I do actually want to skip ahead to another type of spacecraft that I just alluded to that were used to go into space, but then again landed back here on Earth. So we're going to round out all the ones that landed back on Earth just first. And that is, of course, this one. So this is the Space Shuttle Enterprise. So we are very, very lucky to have this in our collection up on our flight deck. This was the very first space shuttle ever built. It's the prototype orbiter. And when they were building these, the main goal was really just to transport large things like satellites and telescopes and pieces of the International Space Station that they put together like a big puzzle up in space. So it could hold a lot more people. I mentioned earlier, 7 to 8 people. You can also notice actually right behind where you see the windows in the front, there's a little bit of white space, but then that whole middle section there, that's the payload bay. And the majority of that is completely empty. It would open up while it was in space, actually. You could put things in it, these large pieces of equipment, satellites, telescopes, things like that. You can think of that kind of like the trunk of a car or, the back of a big truck. So that area was used for storage, really. No one actually went in that space. So the capsule part of it where the humans lived, that was a little bit bigger, of course, than the capsules that we sent up before. But the space shuttle, again, this was after we had landed on the moon. And now our goal was to really explore a little bit closer to home and put up these things that would let us see further into space without physically going there. But I'm going to tell you a big, deep, dark secret about this particular space shuttle. Are you ready, everyone? This space shuttle, it never went into outer space. Oh, it's true. But we do still love it very, very much. This was, again, the prototype. This was a testing vehicle that they needed to see if, something this massive, it was an experiment. This, 150,000 pounds of this machinery, if it could even work and glide through the air. It has kind of more of an airplane design to it. And the idea of this one was that it was going to then be usable. It would land on a runway, just like an airplane. Because if you remember before, those capsules were one-time use. They would land in the ocean. They were recovered. Maybe they sunk to the bottom of the ocean, but they were eventually recovered. And then they were put in museums. And that was kind of it. But with this new design, NASA could reuse it over and over and over again. So that was very cost effective for them, too. Now, the Enterprise go into outer space, at least get up into the sky. Here are some photos of an actual test flight that. So normally when these things go up, it's attached to a rocket. And again, lots of planes, up into space. Giant fuel tanks, those white things. It's all fuel. But it didn't use a rocket while it was testing. So this particular one got a piggyback ride from a 747 airplane instead. So back in 1977, this jet lumbered down the way. It eventually took off with a space shuttle on its back up to 26,000 feet. It was going 470 miles per hour, which honestly isn't really that high or fast. Commercial planes actually higher and faster than that. And then while it was up there, Enterprise just became its wings and the tail to help to guide it. So it made banking turns to slow itself down. It just fell through the sky like a paper airplane. And ultimately, then it landed on a runway. Look at it's like an airplane at an airport. So these shuttles, when they came back, they didn't have any fuel or really any controls other than just the ability to control the flight surfaces, those flaps on the wings and the tail, to just make those little turns, just to go. It landed on its shuttle Columbia, landing at Edwards Air Force Base in one of its earlier missions. So after NASA was satisfied, with all these tests that they had done on the space shuttle prototype, which is the one we have, they decided, all right, this is good. And they created 5 other orbiters that were used to go into space. And much of my childhood, actually, I remember watching those go up. I grew up in Florida to see and hear those launches. And then 2000, they retired the space shuttle program. We at Intrepid were lucky enough to receive one of the remaining shuttles. So there are 4 of the 6 still remaining. And they're one in California and then, of course, New York City. Enterprise back in to kind of oop, there we go. I think I might have popped I lost my connection midstream. Okay. Hey there, everyone. Thanks for hanging in there with some technical difficulties. So I'm just going to rewind a little bit. So as I was saying, when the museum got the Enterprise back in 2012, we were so excited that we decided to celebrate it the same way that it all began. So we put it on the back of a 747 jet, and it did a victory lap all the way around Manhattan. So if you were in the city at that time, you might have even seen that amazing sight yourself, as it's, the space shuttle flying through the air. So after space shuttles, we didn't stop going into space. In fact, we went back to using capsules just like this one. So this is a real Soyuz capsule in our space shuttle pavilion, and it has actually been to outer space. So you can see right at the top part where it's a bit lighter there, it has some scorch marks. So that's flames, right? We're going friction as it was coming in re-entry. Those are actual burn marks on it, which is cool, I think. Why not display it like that? So this is what astronauts use to go into outer space after shuttles. So these capsules were sent up by Russia. Until recently, they basically sold seats to the United States in order to get up to the International Space Station. But the Soyuz has three main parts to it to get into space. So here you can see, first of all, it's got the orbital module, number one there. So that is what's going to connect to wherever you're going. So in this case, that's the International Space Station. So that's where it would dock to it. Then the next thing you have is the re-entry module. So the part that comes back home, of course, the most important part, the one that we have in the museum as well, but the part that keeps them safe. And actually, what's kind of cool is that you can see that's all covered in that silver material that was all burned away on the one that we have on display. And then the last part, that white area back there, that is the service module. So that has the heating and the cooling machinery and all the electrical components that it needs to make everything run. So everyone, imagine you are, an astronaut. How cool. Congratulations, you're an astronaut. You're up at the International Space Station and you are coming home during this era when the Soyuz capsules were commonly used, and they actually still kind of are. So let's say you're coming home to finish your mission. So you would climb into the re-entry module and you'd climb in with some friends, just like that, on the left. So you can see three astronauts crammed in there, super, super, super tight. But what's really interesting about that is that, or in the Soyuz capsules in particular, is that you didn't land in water like our earliest capsules. So these Soyuz capsules took off from Kazakhstan near Russia. And they were sent up by the Russian Space Agency, of course. So it didn't really make a lot of sense for them to land it in the ocean since Russia's effectively landlocked, right? It's not really near water and wouldn't make sense to land it in the Atlantic Ocean because it's certainly not anywhere near that. And it's the Russian Space Agency, so it's closer to them. So they instead decided to land in the desert. But instead, and because they're landing on dry land, they had to think a little bit differently. So it's got parachutes, of course, that come out to slow it down, just like we have on our capsules that were landing in the water. But it's also got explosives on the bottom. So that dust cloud that you see in the picture on the right, that's not it landing necessarily. That's actually dust kick up after the explosion. So they explode these things downward to give it a last minute boost up in order to counteract some of that speed when coming in for that landing. So that's how the Soyuz capsules works. Again, a bumpy landing, but you can also see in that picture, those astronauts are super snug in there. They've got lots of padding to protect them when they hit that ground. So that is pretty much a rundown of how we've landed spacecraft here on Earth. All right. So whether that be on land or on water. But next up, we're going to talk about landing on other places like the moon or other planets. But before we do, I do want to also, pause here again and check in to see if we've got any questions. So, any questions so far? Why was the Soyuz capsule used? So the Soyuz capsule was used because we stopped using space shuttles. So again, 2011, they retired the space shuttle program. Really, it came down to the fact that it was very expensive and kind of dangerous. Unfortunately, we did lose 2 of our space shuttles and the astronauts who were on board. So they decided the risk did not necessarily outweigh what they were doing using the space shuttles, and funding was cut, as you know, is the reason a lot of things end up going by the wayside. So it came down to money, and they realized it would just be easier to buy seats on board these Soyuz capsules that were put up by Russia. It was the International Space Station, after all. Many countries are all working together up there. So we thought we'd all work together and use the Soyuz capsules to go up. So that's why we use it. All right, one more question. How heavy was the space shuttle? Very, very heavy. So again, it is this thing that you've got all this equipment. First of all, you have the actual orbiter, right? So the white thing that we just looked at on the screen. Then you've got the payload bay and anything that goes inside of the payload bay. So if you've got a satellite, or you've got a telescope, or you've got, you know, part of the ISS, that's going to add more weight. Plus you've got all the people on it, plus any, you know, food or anything that you're also going to be using to deliver to the International Space Station, maybe, or just up there. So it's a lot. It was about 150,000 pounds. And so that is why when you see those space shuttles, actually I have a little plushy one here. When you see those go up, you've got these giant fuel tanks that they are attached to. It's liquid fuel and solid fuel. And these tanks don't even make it into space. They burn through all of this stuff. They fall down into the ocean, and then it just is up there orbiting, and then it lands again on the runway. So these can be reused. This one just burns up on reentry. Very, very, very heavy, though. That is the answer. All right. So moving on now to our next era, or rather moving backwards, I guess. As you all may know, in 1969, the United States successfully landed humans on the moon. And it was these three guys, or rather two of them, and the third one was there too. So we have Neil Armstrong on the left. We have Buzz Aldrin on the right, and then Michael Collins in the center. Now, Michael Collins is a name that not many people know, but he was there for that Apollo 11 mission. He was the command module pilot and actually stayed in the capsule waiting to pick them up again after dropping them off on the moon. So I like to say he was kind of like their getaway car. So, you know, some people say that he was out there going around the block looking for parking while they were down there on the moon. But he's a really important guy too. So we like to give him kudos. Now, landing on the moon was a lot different than landing on Earth, as you can imagine. Why do you think that was? Tell me in the chat. Why do you think that, you know, landing on the moon might be a little bit different? You know, what are some of the differences between the Earth and the moon? Why might that be a little more challenging? Even though the moon is pretty close to Earth relatively, they are still very, very different. And things act a little differently on the moon than they do here on Earth too. So, of course, that means that landing on the moon is going to be just a bit different as well. So first of all, everyone, the terrain, I can tell you, is different. There's no oceans of water like we have here on Earth to, you know, have kind of a softer space to land. The terrain is rocky. It is very bumpy. There's lots of craters because things smash into it all of the time. It takes a lot of the space debris that might come and hit us on Earth, but it kind of acts like a bodyguard at times and just shields us from that. So yeah, there's a lot of impact craters, and you probably don't want your astronauts to land on something that's super bumpy because it could be a bit tricky. Also, the Earth has an atmosphere that, you know, helps to keep the air that we breathe in surrounding the planet. So that's the reason we can use parachutes in the first place, to help to slow us down. It catches that air, and when it's coming through the atmosphere, you know, it can catch all of that. Well, the moon doesn't really have that to hold in air. So parachutes aren't going to do us too much good up there. And also, of course, if you've ever seen footage of astronauts on the moon, they seem to bounce around a lot, right? Now, they take a little bit longer, a little more graceful as they're bouncing. But that's because gravity is a bit different there too. It's about 1/6 of what we have here on Earth. So that's going to affect your landing strategy just a bit as well. So this is what the scientists came up with. So this is an actual model of what we put up on the moon, what our first humans on the moon took to get up there, and what helped them to land back home safely. So again, number one, we've got the service module that has the heating and the cooling and the electrical components. Then next we have the command module. So that's what comes back home again and lands in the ocean. That's what Michael Collins was up in. And then part 3 here. This is the lunar module. Now, when the Saturn V rocket took off, it actually only had parts 1 and 2 on it. The other was on another rocket that they took up. And then while they were in space, they connected part 3 to it. And how did they learn how to do that docking maneuver? Well, that was one of the things they were testing out during the Gemini missions. So thanks to those fellows who were able to figure out how to make friends in space, right? And how to dock. But the lunar module was actually an amazing vehicle because it ultimately is the thing that landed us on the moon. Again, this is part number 3. So it was made on Earth, but they only ever used it and really could only ever test it while it was in outer space. And this is what it looked like. So it does look kind of funny. Let me know in the comments if it looks like anything that you've ever seen before. I don't know. To me, it kind of looks like a bug. It reminds me of a bug, like a shiny spider, maybe, you know, with all those legs sticking out. But you can actually see that those legs are hinged, sort of. And that's really important because you don't want the astronauts to go, you know, crashing and kind of ricocheting off and bouncing around when they land. So it used retro rockets instead of a parachute, really, because, again, we don't really have the air there to slow it down. It used rockets that were similar to Soyuz, angled down to control its descent, to sort of power it down. And then eventually it landed on the moon. But the legs were able to absorb a lot of that shock on impact. So the astronauts didn't end up, you know, ricocheting and getting hurt. And then, of course, the rest is history. They, you know, did great work up there. And then when they were done, they climbed back into the lunar module. So they climbed into the top part up there. The bottom part, the golden part there, is actually called the descent stage. So that's the part that had the thrusters to power you down to descend to the surface. And that's all they really needed in order to land. That's all they used for that. So they didn't need it anymore to take off. So the top part, you're going to laugh, but to me, it kind of looks like a face. It reminds me of like the Transformers logo, like the eyes and the nose. That part is called the ascent module. So that separates, and then that goes back up to meet with the command module, which is, remember, floating around. That first one had Michael Collins sitting in there waiting for them. So they connected up there, they docked, and then they were to head right back home and then safely land in the ocean where they were picked up again. So that, in a nutshell, is landing on the moon. So, you know, now we can think, okay, we've landed on the moon. What about landing a little further away? What about something like Mars? So Mars has been all over the news in the past few months, of course, because we just landed our Perseverance rover there, and it's doing amazing things right now, if you have been checking in on that. It just launched a helicopter there, believe it or not, last week, I believe. Super cool. I think they're pausing on that, and they're uploading some updates to the software now. But prior to Perseverance, we can't forget about some of the other very famous rovers that we landed on Mars. We have, of course, we've got Spirit, and we've got, here it comes. Where is it? It's Opportunity. It's coming. Where is it? There it is. Excellent. Technical difficulties. All right. Now you may be thinking, Alicia, you made a mistake. That looks like the same image pasted twice. But no, my friends, your eyes are not deceiving you. They are twin rovers. They look exactly the same. And these are artist renderings anyway. So we sent twin rovers up to Mars. And now, everyone, we are going to play a little game. I am going to ask you a few questions about them. And let's see how much you know about your Mars rover twins. All right, so I'm going to ask you a question. And if you think I'm talking about the rover Spirit, I want you to type a 1 in the chat. And if you think I'm talking about Opportunity, I want you to type a 2 in the chat. All right, so 1 for Spirit and 2 for Opportunity. All right, here we go. First question. Which one went the furthest? So which one traveled the farthest while it was on the surface of Mars? So give me a 1 or a 2 in the chat. Now, both of these rovers, I will say, were sent up into outer space. And they, you know, were sent to Mars to drive around on the surface of Mars. And there is a couple of minutes delay between the commands that we send here on Earth to get all the way to Mars. But we can actually control the rovers remotely from here on Earth. So write your answers in the comments for me. Which one do you think went the furthest? 1 for Spirit, 2 for Opportunity. All right, so I see some 1s. All right, some 1s, some 2s. Answers are coming in. All right, so everyone, the answer is Opportunity. So it went a grand total of 28 miles, whereas Spirit just went 4.8. There's a reason for that, but that's not really too far, we know. But it did have also, some slightly different things that it was looking at and was able to help us out with. So that's okay. We still love it. So Opportunity ended up traveling some further distances. All right. So next question: which one got some help from a dust devil? Now, what is that, you might ask? Well, Mars has, first of all, Spirit 1, Opportunity 2. Let me know in the chat. So, Mars has lots and lots of dust on its surface. As you know, it's got that very classic red, rusty dust. And there are actually some dust storms. So, dust blows around all the time and it gets everywhere. And what ended up happening was dust blew onto one of these rovers and its solar panel sensors. So, basically, what it's getting its power from the sun, right? It got blocked. It covered in dust. So it wasn't getting its power from the sun like it needed. And NASA was like, okay, well, that's it. It's done. It's dead. There's nothing we can do. It's on Mars. But luckily, a dust devil came along. It's basically a mini tornado of just like swirling dust and wind. And it came over and it just, just blew all the dust off the panels. And there it was. It sprung right back to life. So there you go. So which one got some help from a dust devil? Was it Spirit or was it Opportunity? All right, so let's see. We've got some 1s and a 2. All right, my friends. So the answer is Spirit. If you said 1, you were correct. And since you're probably very curious, I'll also show you. Here is a picture of a dust devil. Look at that. It's kind of cool looking. Again, it's a swirling column of dust that just moves across the surface of Mars. And it helped out our little rover friend there. So kind of cool. All right, next question. Which one of these had a broken wheel that made a great discovery? Was it Spirit or Opportunity? 1 or 2? So which one had a broken wheel, and because the wheel was broken, it helped it to figure out something really special about Martian soil? Anyone have a guess? Let's think about why a broken wheel might help us to figure out about Martian soil too. That's actually kind of an interesting thought. All right, so I see some 2s in the chat. I see 1s again. Oh, we're looking pretty split here. All right, last few seconds as we wind down. Oh, very split. This is great. All right, everyone. So the answer is, once again, it is Spirit. So Spirit, you might recall, also was the one that traveled the least distance. So maybe that was a little hint for you. Spirit had a broken wheel that helped us to discover something really, really cool. So look at this picture. Isn't that cool? I know you're probably thinking, wait, it just looks like dirt. What am I looking at? Well, they studied the dirt because as Spirit was moving along it and dragging its broken wheel along with it, it uncovered this under the surface. There are silicates, which are actually really, really good indicators of the presence of life. So this doesn't, of course, mean that there currently is life on Mars, but maybe at one point in the past, Mars might have had life. And that's all thanks to that broken wheel. How about that? So pretty cool. So there's silicates under the surface of all of that rusty red dust. All right, last question. Which had a longer mission length? Now, both of these rovers were launched in the summer of 2003, pretty close to each other. So which one ultimately, though, had the longer mission length? Was it Spirit, type 1, or Opportunity, type 2? So let me know in the chat. What do you think? All right, we've got some answers coming in. We got 1s. Any other guesses? 2s. Whoa, pretty split again. All right. All right. And here we go, everyone. The answer is Opportunity. So Opportunity had a longer mission. Spirit's mission was 6 years long. Pretty good. Probably though, because of all of the problems that it was having, it's okay. We did talk about some of those, but the Opportunities mission was about 16 years long. So really amazing lifespan. And honestly, both of them did amazing work for NASA all along the way on Mars. So bravo for our twin rover missions, Spirit and Opportunity. They were awesome. Now, how did they land on Mars, though, right? Because Mars is different than Earth. Again, there's no oceans, and things are it's different than the moon too. Mars is gravity. Again, it's a little less than Earth, but it's still there. And it also does have an atmosphere, but it is a lot thinner than we have here on Earth. And also, when we're landing something really far away here, you also have to take into consideration the delay between when we send the signals and then when we receive it, and it has to know when to do what, and the timing has to be right. Very complicated. If you were tuning in for the Perseverance landing, you might have recalled that there was that huge delay and everyone was biting their fingernails. So here is how we did it. So if you take a look at this, this is kind of similar actually to the Soyuz capsule, where they sent out the parachutes on top to slow it down. And they also, again, fired the retro rockets to slow it down even more, to stabilize it, just like the lunar lander. But even further down in that picture, you can see something that kind of looks like a bunch of grapes hanging down at the bottom. Isn't that interesting? There you go. So inside of those grapes is actually where the rover was. And they are these kind of like big balloon shaped things, so it would come down and it would actually bounce. It'd bounce around. I'd imagine this would be so fun to see in real life. The rover's inside of all of those, but it would bounce around until it found a nice place to settle on the surface. And then once it found that nice area where it could rest in place, then the balloons would deflate and they would shrivel up, kind of look like, I don't know, kind of like raisins or like a brain kind of here. And then it would open up. The rover would open up and magically reveal itself. And here it was, this little kind of golf cart sized rover. But everyone, as you may know, these aren't the last things that we've sent to Mars. The last two things that we sent up were Curiosity and Perseverance. Now, they got on Mars a little bit differently, and I'm going to show you how here. So bear with me. Here we are. This is actually a simulation, a video here of what was happening, at least for Curiosity, and what was very similar for what was happening with Perseverance as well recently. And this is going to show you, again, it's an animation of the 7 minutes of terror, because this is the time period where we don't actually know what's going on with the rover. We lose all communication because of interference with the Martian atmosphere. So here we go. I'm going to hit play on this and I'll talk you through it. So first of all, it's going to come in as it starts to load here. There we go. The first thing you're going to see is the top part separate. So that's kind of its guiding system. It goes away. And so now you've got this capsule coming into the Martian atmosphere. It's going to correct itself to put most of the bottom facing the ground of Mars, because we are going to be generating a lot of friction, a lot of heat. So as it's coming in, you're going to see you've got that heat shield that's going to be there to help to deflect a lot of the heat. And as it comes in, you're going to really start to notice it. It's going to deflect a lot of that heat away from the main part of the capsule. And it's a similar approach to what we had in our early capsules too. We had a heat shield as we were coming in through Earth's atmosphere as well. So if you put your hands together and rub them together, you can generate heat. It's that same type of friction. There it goes. So it's working against all that friction, and then it's going to start to stabilize itself, but it's still moving really fast. So to avoid crash landing, it's going to deploy parachutes. And as the parachute comes out, you're also going to notice the heat shield come off because, well, we don't really need that anymore. And also, when the heat shield comes off, it frees up some space so that we can use a camera on the bottom, and it actually takes pictures of Mars. There it goes. There's the parachute. There's the heat shield falling off, and it takes pictures of Mars as it comes in for a landing. So it's checking it in real time to make sure there's no rocks in the way of its landing. And then once it gets to a certain height, again, they don't need that parachute anymore. So it's going to detach. We're going to fire our retro rockets to slow us down. And then because Pause it right there, right? Because the retro rockets can't get super close to the ground. We need to make sure there's not a lot of shock. Of course, when the rover lands, we don't want it to break. So they pull out the sky crane, which lowers it down to the ground and then safely separates. So there it goes, lowering it. And there you have it. And so that is how we were able to land Curiosity, and very similarly, how we did Perseverance as well. So as you can see, it took a lot of thinking in order to figure all of this out. There was a lot of trial and error, as you can imagine, to try to get this to land right. We don't want to ruin this very, very expensive piece of equipment that's going to be giving us all of this incredible pictures and data from the surface of Mars. And so they had to make sure that it was going to be safe and sound there. So Perseverance, of course, is the newest rover to land on Mars. The mission of it is specifically to search for signs of life, past or present. And something else really cool about Perseverance is that it actually has a drone, a little helicopter that is flying around on the surface of Mars. I think I might have mentioned that earlier. So we really are doing unbelievable things right now that we have never done before. Technology is so, so, so cool. And also, here's a fun fact that I learned too. They actually attached a small piece of the wing covering from the Wright brothers' original 1903 Wright Flyer. So that's the first powered aircraft on Earth that we had here. They attached it to a cable under the helicopter's solar panel. So there's kind of a little homage to our first steps of flight here on Earth up there on Mars. And also another fun fact, during the moon landing in 1969, Neil Armstrong also carried a piece of the Wright Flyer to the moon in the lunar module too. So lots of connections there. All right, so we think we have time for just a couple more questions before we wrap up. So any last questions for me today? Have the rovers come back from Mars? So no, actually, once they're there, they stay there. Mars is pretty much super, super far away. So it takes a little over 8 months just to get there. And we also don't have anything to launch them back home to us, unfortunately. So they just send us the data back through signals, and there's a bit of the delay. But I do think that once we send astronauts to the surface of Mars, eventually, one of their missions is going to be to pick up some of the smaller things we've sent there, like Pathfinder, for instance, which was like a much smaller rover. And I think it's just more for sentimental value. I think so NASA can get that back. But no, once the rovers are there, they stay there until they no longer work. All right, one more question. Is someone controlling the probes like a remote control car? Yes, essentially, yes. Like I mentioned, there is that huge delay. So it is kind of like, waiting for that signal to go before the rover can accept the command. And you really have to pay attention to what it's sending back to you, because you don't want it to end up in a ditch somewhere, like upside down or something, right? I think we've all, had that experience with a remote control car where it's upside down. You're just like, oh, this isn't gonna work. I got to go fix it. But we can't just go to Mars and flip it back right. So really got to pay attention to it. But effectively, yes, that is exactly how it works. It's like a remote control car, and they are able to, change commands on a whim if they'd like, and respond to whatever pictures and things it's sending back to us and whatever data it's sending back. So really a cool experience up there. Perseverance is really cool. I encourage you all to check it out and see all the updates with it. All right, so my friends, that concludes our Lunar Landers program for today. If you have any other questions about our programs, feel free to reach out to us through our website, intrepidmuseum.org, or also through our social media. Also, be sure to follow or subscribe to this channel that you're watching now, and also visit our website for any upcoming programs we have. For instance, our next family program is going to be Tuesday at 3 p.m., Journey to Space, where we are going to talk a bit more about some of the early space program capsules and missions that we sent up. Also, our museum is now reopened to the public on Thursdays through Sundays from 10 to 5. I think I plugged that earlier. So if you are in the area or passing through this way, we would love to see you back at the museum as well, where you can check out that Space Shuttle orbiter, for example, right behind me here, for yourself in person. And lastly, I would like to invite you to join us tonight for our next installment of Virtual Astronomy Live with Kerbal Space Academy. So this month, we are going to be discussing NASA's upcoming SpaceX Crew 2 mission. So that'll be the first to launch 2 international partner crew members as part of the Commercial Crew program. And as always, there will also be a fun pre-show starting at 5 p.m., hosted this month by our fabulous curator of aviation and aircraft restoration, Eric Bain. So once again, that is tonight in just about an hour, actually, to kick things off. Pre-show starts at 5, and the main event will start at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So you can register in advance via our website, intrepidmuseum.org, and also catch it streaming live on our Twitch channel. So once again, thank you all so much for joining us today, and hopefully we will see you online for an upcoming program. Thank you so much, everyone, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.